Welcome to PRSA Silicon Valley's Friday Forum. My name is Vanessa Yanez, and it is a pleasure to be with all of you today, wherever you're coming in from. Friday Forum is the industry's team meeting. That's right, just for you, PR industry. We are here for you, and we are doing this for you every week. Look for us, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. We will be here almost every Friday. So Friday Forum, PRSA Silicon Valley, welcome to all of you. Hey, did you know that you can put your messages in the chat? So if you have something to say, tell us where you're coming in from. We'd love to hear from you. We have a lot to talk about. Today, we are really looking forward to such an amazing program. The PRSA Silicon Valley, if you guys don't know us, we're on all the socials. We are here for the industry. That means we volunteer our time to make the industry a better place. So we're so happy that you're here with us. And this hour is about you, where you learn, where you teach, and you go off and make terrific judgment decisions. So find us everywhere on the socials, and we look forward to engaging with you directly. This is the industry that we want, that you want, and we want to make sure that you are getting the best from your experience and throughout your career. So today I am super excited because we are going to be talking trust. One of the most important things that PR pros have to be concerned with is whom do you trust? And today with us, we have Margot Edelman, who will be talking about the Edelman Trust Barometer findings just for us and here talking with you. And she'll be in conversation with Arthi Shah. Arthi Shah, many of you know Arthi. She's a PR consultant. Many of you have worked with her through the industry, and you may know her from her work at Provoke or PR Week before that. She's also, and Margot is too, a PRSA Silicon Valley board member. So if you're looking to get involved, this is our PSA to get you involved too. It's lots of fun. Join us. And let's bring Arthi up, Paul, if we could. Hey, Arthi, it's so good to see you.
Hey, Vanessa, likewise.
Thanks for joining us today. We have a lot to talk about, and we have an hour to cover it. And stick with us, you guys. I see Jerry Corbett already in the messages. So I got to go start working on the messages and just engage with people. Tell us a little bit more about what we're going to experience today and what the audience should expect.
Yes. Well, thank you, Vanessa. And I am, of course, glad to be here. As you said so nicely, the industry's team meeting. And I've always loved how you have said Silicon Valley is a mindset. It is not a place. So welcome, everyone, from wherever you're dialing in from. It is exciting to be here talking about trust. I believe many of you know Edelman's long-standing, highly sought-after thought leadership platform is around trust. I believe it's now 22 years old. That's amazing to think. And as Vanessa said, we will have Margot Edelman on to talk about this. She is GM of Edelman Bay Area, and she will walk us through the 2022 findings. I won't tease any headlines or questions now, but I will be back on in about 30 minutes to have a spirited Q&A with Margot about these findings and about the PR industry. We will, of course, open the discussion to audience Q&A as well. So as Vanessa said, just please keep those coming into the chat from wherever you're tuning in from. Also, I'll just see that you can follow along with the Friday Forum hashtag. And again, as Vanessa said, we are here every Friday, 11 a.m. Pacific, talking about the most critical issues for our industry. So I think with that, Vanessa, I think we're ready to hand it over to Margot.
Awesome. Hi, well, thank you. Hi, how are you? Thank you, Arthi, for the introduction. And thank you, Vanessa, for having me on. Always love presenting to PRSA Silicon Valley. So this is great. So I think what I'll do is I'll just start out by taking us through the results of the 2022 Trust Barometer. And then Arthi, look forward to getting some questions from you, followed by questions from the audience. So I'll just ask sort of as I go through, if you can make a mental note of what you want to ask, what topics you want to come back to, and then feel free, of course, to put them in the chat later so we can get to them.
Sounds great.
Awesome. So let me just give you a little bit of background about myself. I'm Margot Edelman, as Arthur and Vanessa said, I'm the general manager for the Bay Area hub for Edelman, which comprises both our San Francisco and Sacramento offices. And totally agree that the Bay Area is now a mindset. We have team members really all over the West Coast and some on the East Coast as well. So we really are, at this point, a US team focused on Bay Area clients. We have about 170 professionals working with clients that range from Adobe to Infosys, to newer clients of ours like DoorDash and Pinterest. So very excited to be with you guys here today. I'm going to take you through the overall findings from the Edelman Trust Barometer from 2022. We actually have a tech cut of the Trust Barometer that's going to be coming out in April. So I'll be sort of returning to the PRSA forum to deliver the results of that in a few months. So this is more broadly the Trust Barometer findings, but there is a little bit of hint about what we're going to see in tech, which we'll obviously get into more in depth in April. Next slide. So first, let's just show sort of what is the Trust Barometer and what's the history of the Trust Barometer. So Edelman has actually been studying trust for 22 years, which is quite a long time now. And what we do is we measure the state of trust in business, government, media, and NGOs. We started out in 2001 and we've done it all the way up to 2022. And what's interesting is that the findings of the Trust Barometer really track what's going on in the world. So for example, during the financial crisis in 08-09, we saw a significant drop in trust in business, and in particular, a significant drop in trust in the financial services industry. Actually just in 2020 when the pandemic hit, and there obviously was sort of a stepped up need for government, we actually saw trust in government radically go up right in those sort of first months of 2020. So it's really interesting data. Again, it really does track sort of what's going on in the world. And we're lucky to be able to do this actually in 27 countries. So it really is a truly global study of trust. Next slide. So what we've seen this year is that we saw pretty significant trust declines in government and in media. And business is actually really the only trusted institution across the board. We haven't seen a rise in trust in business, but it still is trusted, which we define as 60 points or more in trust. NGOs is the next at 59, followed by government, and then the lowest is actually media. And just something to quickly call out on this slide is that in May 2020, government was the most trusted institution. So significant drops in trust in government, which again, not surprising perhaps given sort of what we've seen in terms of the initial pandemic response and then sort of how things have played out over the past couple of years. Next slide. So what we see here is that trust in most industry sectors has risen, and I want to particularly call out trust in technology, which rose by 4 points. I'm sure many on this call work in the tech sector, so good news for the tech sector. And then it's followed by education, healthcare, manufacturing, and food and beverage. So you can really see the breakdown by sector. Edelman actually comes out with different trust reports by sector, so you'll be able to find those on our website. We're going to come out with healthcare next, then financial services, and then, as I said, tech in the spring. So what we see here is that this year, government and media are truly seen as divisive. So we asked, is this institution a dividing force in society or a unifying force in society? And what we found is that government is seen as a dividing force in society, as is media. Business is unifying, and NGOs in particular are unifying. And again, this is across the board. This is not just in the United States. This is worldwide that we're seeing these trends. Next slide. And a big thing about this one is particularly in media, there is no necessarily one source of media that is trusted. And in fact, there are a few sources of media that are significantly distrusted. Those include search engines, which have now fallen into the distrust category. It changed from 2012 to 22 by 3 points. It dropped. Traditional media has dropped by 5 points. Owned media stands at 43%. It's slightly up, but falls into the distrusted category. And the least trusted news source, perhaps not surprisingly, is social media, and it's dropped by 8 points. over the last few years. So again, this is a significant drop. And especially for, those of us who are in the communications industry, whether we're on the agency side or we work in-house, I think this is an incredibly important slide because it really shows us the extent to which we need to think about how do we build trust for our clients. And it can't necessarily just be relying on traditional media. And in particular, social media, which I know is a big force sort of in, the mid, early 2010s, even through now, if you put out social media, it is not trusted. So that is not necessarily a way to build trust for our clients. And, again, interestingly, the US has some of the lowest numbers here, both in terms of trusting search engines, trusting traditional media, and trusting owned media. Next slide. And then there are also pretty significant concerns about fake news. And again, this is across the board. It's gone up 4% globally to 76 points. And as we can see, again, this is truly across the board, whether it's in the developed world, the developing world, there are significant concerns about fake news. And again, this likely tracks to distrust in social media, which is, potentially seen as spreading fake news. So, no surprise, sort of given all the issues around Facebook this year. Again, these numbers are, high, but perhaps not surprising. Another key issue here is that government is not, keeping going on all the negative stuff, government is not seen as able to solve societal problems. So if you look at the data here, business and NGOs are seen as sort of able to take a leadership role and also get results. Business in particular is seen as able to get results. And media and government are both seen as not strongly taking a leadership role and not getting results. And this is particularly true for government, which is a pretty scary statistic, given that, obviously this is what a lot of us have trusted our institutions and our in particular our governments to do. So again, a huge amount more faith in business, in particular in achieving results, than in government. Next slide. I feel like I'm continuing to be the bearer of bad news on this. So there's also a number of societal fears that are on the rise. And again, a lot of this probably won't come as a surprise to those on the line. However, I think the extent to which these fears are prevalent across the board and increasing is pretty stark. So 85% worry about job loss. I think this is particularly important, again, for those of us who are in the communications industry for technology companies, because a lot of times tech is seen as, automation. It's seen as taking people's jobs. So I think job loss is a particularly important one for the tech sector to be thinking about. Climate change is incredibly important. People worry about that. And it's gone up by 3 points. And again, for the tech sector, whether it's, crypto mining, or it's, lithium batteries for electric vehicles, climate change and the tech sector, again, are deeply aligned. And again, it's something us as sort of tech communicators really need to think about, both in terms of the actions our clients are taking and then how we talk about it. People are worried about cyber attacks, they're about losing their freedom, and they're also worried about prejudice and racism. And, not surprisingly, this cycle of distrust threatens societal stability. What we really see is that NGOs and business are left under a disproportionate pressure to take on societal responsibilities, perhaps beyond what should be their remit and beyond their ability. So it is a cycle of distrust that we are really seeing across the board over the last year, and again, reflected in the data. What does this mean beyond just sort of a string of a lot of, negative data in slides? Well, what we believe this means is that societal leadership is actually now a core business function, with trust in business, significantly higher than, other institutions. With business seen as more competent, more able to get things done, it is increasingly imperative that business have sort of societal issues and leadership on these issues as a core part of how they do business. So stakeholders are actually now even holding businesses accountable. It's no longer the world of Milton Friedman, where the business of business is business. We can really see from the data that all different types of stakeholders, whether it's consumers, whether it's investors, actually care about holding business accountable. So 58% of consumers say they'd buy or advocate for brands based on their beliefs and values. For employees, which is incredibly important right now in the war for talent, 60% say they choose a place to work based on their beliefs and values. 64% say they invest based on their beliefs and values, and also 88% of institutional investors say they subject ESG to the same scrutiny as operational and financial considerations. So we are really in a new world here, where how a business behaves in the world, what a business does in the communities in which it operates, are equally important to the profits that it provides or the wages it pays. So again, for us as communicators, it's incredibly imperative that we, A, understand this, and B, help our companies both act this way and then also communicate about it in a way that's credible and will help them both with employee attraction and retention, investors, and consumers. Another key point here, again, I think both for those of us on the client side and those of us at agencies, is that actually my employer is the most trusted around the world. So if you look at the numbers here, people trust business at 61%, but people trust my employer at 77%. That is significantly higher than just business in general. And this is particularly true in the developing world. If you look at sort of the really high numbers here, it's India, it's China, it's the UAE. So again, it's places where, they're the developing world, but even in sort of the world of the West, you can see here, Germany, Spain, the US, there's still very high numbers around trust in my employer. Next slide. And again, a key thing for us communicators here is that my employer media is most important. So if you look at where people trust communications from, they trust communications from my employer more than they do from the media, more than they do from advertising, definitely more than they do from their social media feed. So again, as communicators, this is an incredibly important statistic because it really shows the importance of, speaking to one's employees, helping them to understand, what the company is doing, why the company is doing it. And then your employers can actually be an advocate for the company out in the world. So I really do think, if you take, anything away from this presentation as comms people, I think this slide is incredibly important. Again, continuing on, we also see that CEOs are expected to inform policy, but not politics. They are expected to weigh in on a wide range of issues relating to the jobs and the economy, in particular for us tech communicators here, technology and automation, wage inequality, global warming and climate change. What they're not as expected to weigh in on are things like who should the next leader of the country be. But again, it's sort of we're advising the C-suite of our clients or our employers. It's really important in particular to look at sort of the jobs and the economy and technology and automation bucket. Because again, for the tech world, the biggest thing is, what are companies doing to help on retraining? What are they doing to, help the workers of tomorrow, have the skill sets that they'll need to either retain their jobs or get new jobs. And this is, again, an imperative for CEOs to weigh in and have a point of view and also act. And then we also see, again, this is sort of along similar vein, NGOs and business sort of need to act as stabilizing forces. Again, government really not so great here. It's seen as less competent and less ethical, whereas NGOs are a bit more on the ethical scale and business is a bit more on the competence scale. I think the biggest thing here is, you really have government in not such a great position, and there is very much a clear void that needs to be filled. Next slide. And again, continuing on our sort of the theme of business sort of stepping in, we really see that people want business to have more engagement, not less, on core societal issues. This includes climate change, economic inequality, workforce reskilling, access to healthcare, trustworthy information, and systemic injustice. And, again, a lot of tech companies are helping on these issues across the board. If you look at, company like Salesforce with Mark Benioff, it really, across the board has, stance and also is putting its money where its mouth is across all of these issues. And if you're working with clients, they don't necessarily have to take on everything. They can take on one thing that's important. So for example, we work with Infosys and they've taken on workforce reskilling. They've opened up innovation hubs throughout the US, partnering with community colleges to help Americans have, basically software engineering jobs with an emphasis. So again, and a number of companies are investing across the board in workforce reskilling. I think climate, again, is increasingly important for companies, again, not just to have a point of view, but to actually be doing something about it as well. So here you can really see, the issues that are important. And again, the issues that your employers or clients should and can have a point of view on and take action on. And information quality is actually the most powerful trust builder across institutions. So again, this is an incredibly important slide for us as communicators. It's not just about sort of getting results or about, what do we have in here? Exerting power effectively. It's about making sure the information that we deliver is high quality, that it's, valid, that it's accurate. And that is the biggest way to build trust across the board. And it is a really interesting sort of moment, especially in tech, as more and more companies are sort of becoming their own media company. For example, if you look at Andreessen, they've created their own media business essentially, in addition to obviously backing, a number of startups sort of across the world. And the key thing there is the information quality, right? It's making sure that the information that, we're delivering for clients is correct, that it's accurate, that it's not seen as biased, because only then are we going to be able to use sort of the my employer media benefit to build trust. And then just to conclude, on maybe a little bit of a lofty note, we really know that restoring trust is key to societal stability. I mean, you just had to look at sort of the actions around this time last year, January 6th, to know that it is very easy for, society to a little bit go into chaos in a way that we might not have seen in years past. And so, again, with each institution in particular in government, restoring trust is going to be key to maintaining sort of societal stability, not just in the US, but across the world. And with that, we'll get back to questions.
I think I'm back on, right? Yes, I can see myself. So that's a good sign. Okay, well, thank you, Margot. I mean, first of all, there was so much to unpack there. So I'm very much excited for this conversation. I just want to remind audience members again to please put in your questions on the chat form, or whatever platform you're tuning in from. And of course, you can follow us at Friday Forum, the hashtag. So Margot, as I said, there was so much to unpack there, and I think the Economic Forum headline on the findings was such a powerful sort of encapsulation of the research, which was, I think, the cycle of distrust threatens action on global challenges, which I think you sort of touched on really well here. But I'd like to start talking sort of about the challenges that Edelman itself has had around trust in the past few months, and ask you how Edelman is taking its own advice as it relates to trust and concerns about, its work with fossil fuel clients.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, we at Edelman definitely believe that climate change is the biggest threat facing our society today. So make no mistake, we are absolutely on the side of climate change is a huge issue, and one where we absolutely want to be part of the solution. And for us, being part of the solution is not just sort of saying, okay, we're not going to work with climate deniers. It's actively working with companies that are working towards a transition on fossil fuels. So we, as we did a review of our entire client portfolio. We worked with climate experts across the board, and we sort of came to a conclusion of which clients were sort of outside of the framework of the type of companies and policies that we wanted to be working with. And the results of that, I believe, were posted on the Edelman website in late January. So, in doing that, I believe we really sort of took our own advice, or the type of advice we would give clients, which again is to act with transparency, to bring in experts, and then when it's all done, to really provide sort of quality information. outwards. So, again, we're very much committed to working with companies that are part of sort of energy transition. And again, we're also very committed to being transparent about the work we are doing on behalf of our clients. And just something that, I personally have been looking to spearhead, going back to sort of, putting your actions where your talk is we are basically creating a working group around working with companies focused on climate tech. So we're not just saying, okay, hey, we're going to work with oil and gas companies on their transition. We're saying, hey, we want to work with those next generation companies, even if they're a little bit smaller than the typical, Edelman client would be, to really help them sort of get their message out there in a way that would help them attract funding, get user adoption, and really make the case for why sort of technology is helping create this transition. So that's something I'm really personally focused on and want to move forward going, in the coming months.
Yeah. And maybe when you're back on in April, that can be something that you can kind of update everyone on the progress.
Yeah.
We're getting some audience questions, and it seems like many of them are around, sort of what you mentioned about how sort of the 2022 barometer sort of revealed the sort of mindset of distrust. And I think folks want to sort of unpack that a little bit more. So, maybe let's start broad, and then David and Michelle, I see your questions, and I'll tack those on. But obviously where we're seeing this most acutely is around media and government. How has the decline in these two institutions impacted business? And then we can talk. Let's start there.
No, that's a great question. I mean, we do believe it's a sort of a vicious cycle. And so if you have decline in trust in government and media, it only fuels the idea that institutions across the board can't be trusted. So, we do think this is not just like, oh, who cares about it for business? It's the other issues in other parts of sort of the ecosystem. No, we think it's sort of not one and the same, but it all sort of fuels as we call it, a vicious cycle. I also think, it's almost become more of an antagonistic relationship in many ways, especially if you look at the relationship between technology companies and the media. The media, maybe not all media, but, some of it, when you read stories, a lot of it's about, employee dissatisfaction or racism at a company or, the founder making XYZ amount of money and how much does the regular worker make? So it's I think it sort of fuels that distrust, because then if you're the tech company, you wouldn't necessarily say, hey, I want to take my story to XYZ publication. You're like, hey, I'm going to put it on my own channels, and hey, I'm going to, go direct versus going through the media. So I do think it's a little bit of a vicious cycle there as well in the tech world.
So, but in that example that you cited, so who does the consumer trust? Do they trust the companies sort of take on it, or are they trusting the media? I mean, I guess from your data, they're saying that they're trusting the business themselves.
From the data, it shows that your you trust your employer. So you're much more likely to, if I work at Edelman, let's say, I trust the information that Edelman gives me, because that's sort of the relationship you have with your employer. And especially with sort of the divide in media, is seen as polarizing, potentially seen as either being too left or too right. That's in some ways what's sort of fueling the distrust, is that there's no sort of bipartisan information.
So this would be a good time to sort of clarify something that I think David asked, and he asked how government was defined for the purposes of this research. Did you all define it as federal, state, or local? Or
that is a really good question. Let me get back to you on that. I believe we just said government, so I don't think we specifically defined it beyond state, local, and federal. But let me find that out. I'll ping somebody in the chat and I can get back to you.
I think, Michelle, I think Margot just sort of addressed sort of a reason why the media is so distrusted. I think David also had a comment in there just for his take on sort of, it's ironic that government is not trusted since corporate America has steadily undermined government's capabilities to serve the public interest. I think that's just a comment to throw out there.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I hear you on that. I think there's also examples of companies that are doing a lot, to serve the public interest. So, I think it's hard to say sort of one broad brush that, all companies are bad or all companies are good.
So I want to dig into this sort of, what you said about, societal leadership is now sort of a core business function. Who do you think should own that?
That's a great question. I mean, I think historically it's always been the role of government. And if you actually look at sort of what happened right during the pandemic when it hit, government really did step up. Obviously they passed, massive stimulus bill. They were able to sort of get money in people's hands, which was critical in that time, and also ensure that passing bills to ensure that small businesses didn't fail, despite not having the type of foot traffic that you would normally. So I think in that case, government really has stepped up. However, it does sort of seem like government was able to sort of act together in that moment, but over the last sort of year and a half, that sort of coming together moment has dissipated in a lot of ways. And again, for me personally, it really does seem like it's a combination of both. Government needs to sort of continue to come together, and it shouldn't just take sort of a massive pandemic to cause sort of both sides to unite to be able to get things done. And then also for business to continue to step up. And, again, if you look at sort of the profits of some of the businesses during the pandemic, it seems like there's almost an obligation for these businesses to really act as part of the communities in which they operate, not just as these sort of supernatural, organizations that, deliver goods to your house and then disappear.
Right. So let's talk more about CEOs, right? Because you talked about how CEOs are expected to have a position on policy, but not necessarily on politics. So can you talk a little bit more about how that changes their role in society? And also, how can they maintain trust with their own employees?
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of how they maintain trust with their own employees, I think communications is critical. Continuing to offer quality information, updating your employees, regularly speaking to them. I think that's something that's, incredibly important as a way to build trust. In terms of the role in society, at least in the tech world, I mean, it seems like, companies should have, at least, again, looking at the data. And then, again, for me personally, it seems like there is, a higher responsibility in particular, for example, for tech companies around job retraining, around sort of, mitigating the impact of automation on the American workforce, for example. Just because if that doesn't happen, I mean, I guess the other way of looking at it is, we can just pass universal basic income. So maybe that's the other side of the argument. But, I think, at least looking at sort of the data, it seems like there really is, a goal and a desire for companies to be sort of investing in the communities in which they operate.
Right. To bring this back to Edelman, do you mind telling us a little bit about how Edelman spoke to its own employees around the climate change issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to speak sort of from a personal perspective around sort of what we did in the Bay Area, and then what we did as a whole as a business. So, as a business all up, I mean, we held a town hall to really talk through, okay, let's, hear from our employees. Let's sort of discuss with them what the process is that we're going to be undergoing to really do a review of, our full climate portfolio, who we were bringing in as experts to be able to, again, sort of partner with our team to make sure that we were getting the best advice possible around what type of work we should be taking on and what we shouldn't. And then again, sort of delivered the results in a transparent way. And again, it lives on the Edelman website now. For me personally, what I did is, in the Bay Area, at least, we actually don't do a lot of oil and gas work. We actually do a lot of work around sustainability and purpose. So I actually spoke, after we had that, larger meeting, I believe it was back a couple of months ago, announcing the, announcing that we were going to be doing this review. Actually met with our social impact team to sort of hear any questions they had, talk to them, and really understand, okay, if there are specific questions that we were not able to answer in that larger sort of global forum, I would personally go and get those answered. So again, it was all about sort of ensuring information flow, quality information, and really having that sort of one-to-one or one to a few dialogue. Then later on in the Bay, we actually invited Robert Casamento, who we brought on as sort of Edelman's global climate chair. He's sort of our expert in sustainability and climate to speak to the team in San Francisco. So anybody who wanted could join. I think we probably had about 70 people show up, and sort of he presented sort of what our point of view was as Edelman. He actually talked a little bit more just to get into what is going on in climate, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily know or understand. Talked a little bit about some technical stuff. What does carbon capture mean? And then really fielded a ton of different questions from the group. So again, I think it was all about being transparent. It was offering the right experts and sort of engaging with the team rather than just saying, hey, take it or leave it. This is what we're doing. And again, I think on from even a one-to-one basis, what we do at Edelman is if people don't feel comfortable working on an account, they let us know and we'll figure out how to not have them work on that. So I think even for people who feel more of a personal sort of standard of what they want to work on or not, at least for me within the Bay Area, we sort of really think about, hey, what do we want to have? Like if people really don't want to work on something, we'll figure it out so we can switch it up.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about the role that business can play in terms of filling sort of this information void with media, especially since trust in media has been eroding consistently as we've seen year over year. So you mentioned, and sorry, just to switch things up a little bit, you mentioned Andreessen's media investments, and so I'm just curious, how businesses should evaluate the success of this content.
Sure. That's a really good question. In thinking about it, I don't necessarily think it's about evaluate. It's not, the number of clicks you get. It's not, it's a little bit different. You're not trying to, get ad dollars against your content. But I think in a lot of ways there isn't, because of, the number of reporters in newsrooms declining, just, the number of publications in general that cover tech. There's all those enterprise technology, tech trade publications that used to exist 15 years ago. A lot of them are not there anymore. So I think, a lot of the basics, at least in the technology world, a lot of the basics of, explaining what these different technologies mean and do, I think are missing sometimes from the conversation in mainstream media. Whether it's explaining what is AI, what is blockchain, how do self-driving cars work? When are they actually going to be in the market? Why have they not come out yet? These questions that are a little bit sort of explaining the basics of tech are to me are things that companies can own and explain, because they truly have people who are experts, whether it's engineers, whether it's the company's CTO, even the CEO, who really deeply understand these issues, and I think can explain them in a very credible way. So again, I think it's offering up not necessarily a point of view, but it's offering up information in a way, maybe even filling the gap that some of these sort of publications used to fill, years ago. So that's sort of my point of view on why I think, especially in the tech sector, this, type of sort of owned content is so incredibly useful. So, for example, we don't work with Coinbase, but if you're Coinbase, you would want to have information around, what is blockchain, what is DeFi, why is this potentially, beneficial for financial inclusion, rather than having, information, about how much money Brian Armstrong made in the IPO, for example, which a lot of times is what ends up getting reported on. So again, I think for the tech sector, it is particularly important to sort of explain the changes that are being made and how technology is facilitating it. For society,
Right.
Go ahead.
Oh no, go. You can finish your thought, Margot. Sorry,
I'm done.
Next question. So you've teased out the tech cut a few times, and I think folks are probably, especially in this audience, excited to see that. And again, there'll be another Friday forum in I think April-ish to talk about that. But what stood out to me is sort of despite the barrage of crises in tech over the past few years, whether you're talking about Facebook, Amazon, Google, Uber, Lyft, Tesla, you name it, right? It's done fairly well as a sector.
Absolutely.
And so curious sort of why you think that is, and what message or advice you have for the tech companies you work with in light of these findings.
Yeah, absolutely. You mean done well in terms of trust?
Yeah, it's done relatively well, it seems like, from others compared to other sectors.
Totally. Listen, technology for a long time has been the number one most trusted sector. And so, again, it's about my iPhone. It's about my computer. It's the fact that I can do remote work. So, technology really is seen as sort of enabling people's lives. I think the flip side of that is the worries around automation, around job loss, and that's sort of the negative sort of side of the coin for tech. But I think there still is this halo of trust around the technology sector, just because again, it has enabled so many people to live basically normal lives or better lives because of tech. I think the key thing that we're seeing now from our clients is in some ways sort of the rise of the employee as a key stakeholder in tech. If you look at the talent market right now, it's so tight, especially around sort of engineering talent. So what we're seeing is tech companies just wanting to position themselves as a great place to work and a place where engineers can do great work and innovative work. But then secondly, we're also seeing sort of the rise of employees feeling empowered if they're not happy with the company culture to either go to the press or actually even on Medium or owned channels to sort of write their dissatisfaction with what's going on with these companies. So I think it's imperative for tech companies, they're obviously making record profits. They're creating, goods and services that, are enabling people again to lead or have enabled people to lead normal lives in the last year and a half, or last 2 years at this point. But the employee is increasingly a critical stakeholder, and you're sort of seeing the pros and cons of them being critical stakeholders. If you look at the number of tech companies that have had employee issues over the last 2 years, it's really high.
So would you say in terms of, for the tech company to maintain their position as a most trusted sector, I think it sounds like employees are going to be a key part of that. Is there anything else that you would advise tech companies that they need to do to sort of maintain this halo effect?
Definitely employees. I think that's critical. And then, again, we're seeing diversity and inclusion, again, as an incredibly important issue. And it's not just something to sort of give lip service to say, hey, it's a check in my CSR report. It's really investing in making sure that there's a diverse workforce and one where there's equal pay, across races, across genders. So again, it's that sort of looking at a workforce holistically. And then I do think it's around investing in the communities in which the companies operate, in particular around around reskilling their workers and training, training Americans for their, people in general for the jobs of tomorrow. Just because that is, again, such a pain point around fear of job loss and fear of automation taking people's jobs that, I think that's also where tech companies really need to focus. I guess a third area, and again, this is maybe something that's a little bit more off in the future, but one, we're working with our clients on is around AI and responsible AI. So as, artificial intelligence gets better and better and smarter, it's increasingly important to make sure that it's done in a way that's responsible and it's in a way that's equitable. Because if you have AI that's programmed to have sort of the same biases that humans do, it'll only sort of exacerbate those. And obviously there's issues around facial recognition technology. What does that mean around ethics? So it's having, basically an understanding around what will AI do and not do as these technologies increasingly get better.
Right. No, excellent points. I want to take a moment to go back to an audience question. Thank you, Vanessa, for being very patient. Vanessa's question is, how should organizations gauge how their stakeholders are trusting them?
That's a great question. From a communication standpoint, I actually think investing in research is really important. And I think that's investing both in sort of doing internal sort of pulse surveys of your employees to really understand sort of how are they responding to, different initiatives. What do they think about the company overall? How happy are they? So really sort of getting a regular pulse on, companies' employees is important. And then, again, externally, there's ways to survey different groups and really to sort of get an understanding of, trust on different dimensions, whether that's dependability, there's lots of different dimensions that make up trust. I think it's not enough just to say, hey, my stock price is good. I've spoken to, my key top investors, they like me, so I'm good. It's really sort of trying to regularly sort of survey and understand what's going on in the community as a whole. And again, social media also provides, I know it's a whole thing in here. Don't trust social media. It's, don't focus on it. But I still do think some type of social listening and really understanding what's being said in the market about your company is a valuable tool as well for comms professionals.
Building on that question slightly, it seems like one way to ensure to ensure trust is to create mechanisms of accountability. Any thoughts on sort of how that can be done?
Absolutely. again, going back to some of our survey data, as you can see, the institutional investors are increasingly, holding companies to sort of, certain ESG standards. It's not just, again, about sort of, a certain stock price or certain, profit margins. So, I think that's sort of happening naturally, given market pressures, again, around ESG. I think it's also up to, again, a company's leadership and CEO to hold a company accountable. And increasingly, again, as we saw with Edelman, employees are holding their companies accountable, right? So employees are saying, hey, should we be taking that account on? Should we be working with that client? So I think some of the pressure is also coming from employees as well, in particular Gen Z, who, millennials, yes, but Gen Z in particular, who in a lot of ways, have very high expectations for their employers and what they'll expect from them. So I think in a lot of ways, it is sort of that investor group, it's, a company leadership, and it's a company's employees. And also, especially for a consumer product, it's consumers who sort of, in a lot of ways put their money where their mouth is, and would, as we saw from the data, would buy or not buy a product depending on a company's values.
So I want to, having followed the trust findings for many years now, I've noticed that the decline in media and in government has been that's been on a steady decline for years now. What do you think, if anything, would it take for the fortunes to reverse for media and the government, in particular for the government, especially and you mentioned as in the West? What would have to happen for that trend to reverse itself?
So that's a great question. I really do think the fact that the government was the most trusted institution when we did the survey in May 2020 says a lot, because it really was sort of government coming together and doing things that helped people. So I think that sort of shows, okay, if government was able to get that done and sort of not sort of partisan, divided along sort of partisan and party lines, that would reverse. So I do think that was sort of an interesting data point to show that it is possible. On the media front, and to me, honestly, like as somebody who works in comms and like loves the media, loves reporters, like it's almost crazy to me to see those stats, just because like I personally love the media. I read the Wall Street Journal, I read the New York Times, I read the FT, I've read Provoke Media, but no, I love the news. And so it's, it's stats that are not, necessarily for me. They're sort of, I look at them and I'm like, this is crazy. First of all, I do think that social media drags down all of media, just because, again, social media the trust in social is so low. If you look at the issues that Facebook has had this past year, Facebook files reporting in the Journal, and then more broadly, that does not engender trust in media as a whole. And especially the fact that social platforms are now seen as spreading fake news. Again, it doesn't engender trust in the press. And then I also think, again, it's the fact that, media is seen as so partisan. And so it's either that you're the left or you're the right. And that's the way that sort of media is perceived. And many ways, maybe media is driving click-throughs, and interest is by being a little bit more partisan. So if you look at the New York Times, which I love, but if you look at their ad campaign during the Trump administration, it was all around truth. The fact that truth matters, and then you have Trump saying, without him, it'd be the failed New York Times. So you have, a direct sort of setup of, partisanship that's, both being played on, I think, by the Times, and then also by, our former presidents. So, yeah, I don't know if there's a way to change that, but it absolutely seems that partisanship is really what's driving this. And if you look at the data around trust in traditional media, people who I self-identify as Republicans do not trust traditional media, and people who self-identify as Democrats, which I do trust traditional media. So you can really, again, see it falling along party lines.
Right. And if anyone who's on Twitter will know, like the storm around the New York Times and Trump's coverage that's going on right now in real time as we speak. So, I want to wrap on a question about the industry as a whole, the PR industry as a whole, but I will take a moment to just to see if you wanted to comment on David's question here, which is why did trust in government increase in autocratic authoritarian countries, China, Saudi Arabia, compared to the working democracies? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a great question. And again, something where I wish the data didn't say that, because again, as a citizen of the US and as someone who believes in, obviously, democracy, it's not great to see that coming out in the data. listen, I would assume, and again, this is speculative. So again, this is just sort of me, you know, trying to give an answer, is just that, China gets things done for their citizens. Saudi gets things done for their citizens. So, the whole idea that government is not competent doesn't hold for those parts of the world. So I think that might be what's driving that.
So let me, I think this will be our last question. Maybe if it's by the way, audience, if you guys have one last question, you might be able to squeeze it in depending on how long we chat about this last one. But I wanted to bring it back to the PR industry. And do you think that PR firm portfolios are going to come under more and more scrutiny? And, when it comes to trust, this is going to really matter, right? Because, is our industry in sync with A, our employees, and B, some of these larger social movements that are happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, absolutely. And as somebody, I'm 34, coming up in the business, I expect to obviously be in the industry for a while longer. It's, definitely an issue that I've thought about a bunch, is what is the responsibility of the PR industry? What's the responsibility of Edelman? What clients should we be taking on? And I do think we have, a high standard to hold ourselves to. So I absolutely agree with that. And I think it's important, yes, for being a good corporate citizen in the world, but also for attracting the best talent, for attracting the best other clients, because clients want to work with companies that they see as, a force for good in the world. I do think what's interesting is that the bar sort of changes over time. And it's almost like sometimes you almost don't realize that there's been a step change until there's been one. So for example, we stopped working with tobacco companies probably 30 years ago, something like that. And, maybe in a lot of ways that was an easy decision to make, because, what good does tobacco do in the world? But at the time that was a big thing. So it's easy to look back and say, hey, that was an easy decision to do that. But at the time, and obviously I wasn't totally part of that decision then because I was quite young, but, at the time it wasn't as easy of a decision. And I think in some ways, it's obviously a different conversation, but the conversation around climate today and what is the role of sort of marketing companies in, helping to promote an energy transition. What is that? What does it look like? And so it's absolutely something we should be thinking about and making sure that we are, we're working with clients that are focused on a transition, and that we're also working with companies that are part of that next gen of, what energy will look like in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so because I have 3 minutes, I'm going to ask a philosophical question. Just, I'm going to throw this out there. Do you think transparency is actually required for trust? Because if you think about trust, right, it's belief, it's believing, and transparency is actually seeing. Do you think that you need to have transparency to have trust?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if you don't have transparency, I think it's a combination transparency and quality information. Mm-hmm. Because if you just are transparent, but then the stuff that you're putting out in the world is crap, that's not very useful. Right. So I think it's a combination of the two. And if you don't have that, I don't think you can have trust. And I think where companies have gotten themselves into trouble, and again, why, I think comms will probably always be around, or the PR industry will always be around, is companies get themselves in trouble when they're not transparent. Right. And so I think, to me anyways, transparency is absolutely critical.
But it's so interesting, right? Because when you think about companies, you're right. Like when they're not transparent, they tend to get themselves into trouble. But when I think about trust in my personal relationships, right? If I'm saying I trust you, I'm saying that I don't need to know what you're doing. Like I believe in you enough that I don't need that transparency. I don't need to, whatever.
Maybe it's like a vicious cycle of distrust. You have the virtuous cycle of you're transparent, it builds trust. Right. You're trusted. So maybe it's the virtuous cycle rather than the vicious cycle.
Yes. Yes. All right. Well, I think that we're gonna wrap on that note, Margot. Thank you so much for this lively discussion. I am excited to have you back, we are excited to have you back in April to talk more about kind of drilling deeper into the tech sector on this topic.
Wonderful. All right. Sounds great. Thank you so much, Arthi. Thank you, Vanessa. Really great time.
Yes. And I will hand it back to Vanessa, who will, I think, wrap things up for us today.
Whoop. I'm back. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Multiple channels today. Today was the first, and we look forward to our future discussions. Paul, do we have a graphic to show for what's happening next week?
Yes, let me get that pulled up for you guys.
And let me tell you what it is. Next week, Friday, February 18th, we're going to have strategic job prospecting, and it's all about informational interviews. What you need to know, who you need to know. And our guests are Sean Fletcher. Many of you may know him, School of Journalism, Mass Communications at San Jose State University. He's also a doctor, PhD. Jude Garcia, Career Center counselor from San Jose State University, and our moderator, David Vrosbrink, APR, who, oh, look at that. That looks so nice. Thank you. He is also a board member here at PRSA Silicon Valley. We are so grateful to have these really important conversations. Our thanks again to Arthi Shah and Margot Edelman. Trust is the name of the game. It is our game. It is so wonderful that all of you were able to be here. Thank you so much. And we will see you next week on Friday Forum. Bye.